Hello all and welcome to the Rails board meeting. Today is Friday, November 17th, 2023. I'm Alex Vancina, president of the Rails board, and I call this meeting to order at 1 p.m. Emily, would you please call roll?
Sure. Monica Caldecott. Here. Rosie Camargo. Jean Carroll. Here. Alice Creason. Here. Gwen Gregory. Here. Diane Hollister. Is a black guy. Jennifer Hovanek. Renee Leva. Here. Julie Millivek. Here. Thomas Stagg.
Here.
Alex Vancina.
Here.
Vanessa Villarreal. Aaron Voidick. Here. Kathleen Yankowski. Here. We have quorum.
Thank you, Emily. We'll move on to recognition of guests and announcements, which we will handle at the same time. Let's start with guests here in Burr Ridge.
Monica Harris, Rails.
Ann Slaughter, Rails.
Karen Swanson, Rails.
Joe Philippek, Rails.
Emily Feister, Rails.
Rails.
Laura Nemeth, Rails.
Dan Bostrom, Rails.
Thank you. Any public comments here in Burr Ridge? Hearing none, we'll move on to East Peoria. Are there guests in East Peoria?
Kendall Orson, Rails, here in my capacity as an RSA person today.
Hi, Kendall. Any public comments today?
No public comment. You'll be hearing more from me later.
Very good. Thank you. Emily, would you please read the name of guests on Zoom?
Sure. We have Greg McCormick from the State Library, Brian Hubble from Rails, Mark Hatch from Rails.
Hey, any public comments on Zoom? If not, did we receive any public comments by email?
Did not.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to the consent agenda. Please note the review of closed session minutes from May 26, 2023 are included and will be released if included in the motion. Does anyone wish to move any items to the regular agenda for further discussion? If not, I have a motion and a second for approval of the consent agenda.
Catherine, so moved.
Catherine, thank you.
Second.
Alice, thank you. Emily, would you please call roll?
Monica Caldecott.
Yes.
Jean Carroll.
Yes.
Alice Creason.
Yes.
Gwen Gregory.
Yeah.
Diane Hollister.
Yes.
Renee Leva.
Yes.
Julie Millivek.
Yes.
Thomas Stagg.
Yes.
Aaron Voidick.
Yes.
Kathleen Yankowski.
Yes.
And Alex Vancina.
Yes. All right, thank you. Next up is Sharon Swanson with the Rails financial report.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see everyone before this holiday week. So to start off, the October 31st general fund cash and investment balance of approximately $19.7 million would fund approximately 17.2 months of budgeted for operations. General fund revenues through October of a little over $3.2 million were approximately $3.7 million below budget. And this is mostly due to not having yet received any APC grant payments. I know that I reported this last month that the Live and Learn Fund had been discontinued at the state library. So instead of receiving 8 payments like we did in prior years, we'll receive 2 much larger payments. One very, very large payment of a little over $9.9 million from the state's general fund and a little over $1.9 million from the federal LSTA portion of our grant. And just as an FYI, as Greg McCormick mentioned and the state library's office mentioned at the last meeting, that $9.9 million from the state's general fund was vouchered as of October 30th with the Illinois State Comptroller's Office, and we expect to receive it very, very shortly given their recent turnaround of payments. So that's great news, and thank you to Greg and the Illinois State Library and the Secretary of State's office for that. So this under budget amount was partially offset by greater than budgeted investment income. Of course, at the time that the budget was finalized, we budgeted at 3.75% based on projections at that point. And currently interest rates are just over 5.5% right now. And this interest rate slightly declined since September because of the Federal Reserve's decision not to raise interest rates yet again at their November 1st meeting. So it's declining a little, but basically remaining at a steady level right now. This is also offset on that below budget amount by fees and materials. And this is due to timing differences between the actual and budgeted pattern of billings of the E-Rate Illinois and Find More Illinois membership fees. So just timing differences. Moving on to general fund expenditures through October, these were a little over $6 million and were nearly $880,000 below budget. This was due to lower library materials expenditures from yet again, timing differences between budgeted and actual E-Read Illinois program expenditures. And this is partially offset by higher than expected participation in the EBSCO database group purchase. And as well as lower contractual services expenditures due to timing differences between the receipt and payment of invoices from our delivery outsourcing contractor, as well as lower than expected fuel prices in the market overall, which made lower than budgeted fuel recovery charges from that same vendor. So it's been good so far. And the cataloging membership grants and the My Library Is grants are budgeted in the same line. So we haven't yet awarded any of those, although the first grant period for the catalog membership grants ended November 1st. And as I reported in my report, as Ann will talk about later, these applications are currently being reviewed, and if funded in full would account for over half the total budget amount of $230,000. So we are on track to get those reviewed and get that funding in progress. And the under budget expenditures were also due to lower personnel expenditures. And of course, this is due to the multiple open positions that we are actively recruiting for and have actively recruited for during this fiscal year, including the now open position of the member services manager, as well as favorable to budget staff health insurance elections and a blending of when we put the budget in, we included a blended rate for the health insurance premiums because we anticipated at that point a 12% increase in health insurance rates, but it came in at an 11% increase. So as the calendar year rolls over and we get into that new increased amount, the health insurance expense should come up to budget, much closer to budget. And the under budget expenditures were also due to lower vehicle expenditures, and this is mostly due to timing differences between the receipt and payment of our fuel card invoices because they're about a month delayed. And this is partially offset by the fact that vehicle repairs, of course, are continuing to be over budget due to the aging of our fleet. And of course, replacements for these vehicles have been delayed due to the market shortages and prohibitive market pricing. So very, very recently, Rails was able to place the order for box trucks and 7 of the 10 budgeted Ford Transit vehicles. But delivery times, of course, are uncertain now due to the UAW strike and the delayed agreement on a new contract, as well as some stalling with some of the voting for that. And overall, the savings of ordering through the central management system with government contract pricing is about $2,000 to $3,000 from market pricing, and the vehicles ordered so far have come in under the budgeted amounts. So we've had good news, but who knows when we'll receive them to get these vehicle expenditures, the repairs under control. And I did also want to note during the month of October, Rails completed the final purchases for the replacement video conferencing, just some remaining additional. That was basically all that I had. Does anyone have any questions?
All right, thank you, Sharon. We'll move on to reports. I would like to announce that due to the resignation of Robin Hellenthal, I've asked Catherine Yanikowski to serve on the policy committee, and Monica Caldegat has agreed to chair the advocacy committee. Thank you both. The updated committee lists are included in the Rails report. Committee reports were included in the packet. Any additions or questions regarding the committee reports? None. We'll move on to the Rails report, and we're going to jump to Ann at this point with the LSAP broadband reviews.
Thank you. I appreciate the flexibility in the agenda order. to leave a little early today, so didn't want you to miss out on any of the fun. So I'm going to talk with you all about the LSAPs, what they are, our relationship with them, the ways that we work with and support them. And that will be kind of the majority of what I cover with you all, as you can see in your pack. And I will move into an update on what we have been doing in regards to broadband and the large amounts of federal and state funding that are currently being dedicated to it. So in your packet, you have a few documents related to the LSAPs. So I'm going to kind of talk through the first document, the narrative descriptions of what we do with them. And then there are a few other documents that I'll refer to and explain as we go along. So LSAP is like my personal favorite strange acronym that we use all the time that nobody understands until you know. It stands for Local Library System Automation Program. And in Illinois specific term, it's defined in the administrative rules related to the Library System Act. And, you know, essentially it's a group of libraries that share catalog software. Commonly also referred to as a consortium or a network. Network is more commonly used in other states, so people from outside of the states especially don't know what we're talking about. But I have the version from the administrative rules, the definition in this document. It's pretty brief, but then the next document is in your packet is the Rails board approved definition, which just builds on what is described in the administrative rules and you know, kind of illustrates some more of the points. So I'm not going to dwell on, you know, everything that's in there, but that is the Rails specific definition of LSAPs, and then sort of the ways that we work with them, and especially the ways that we support them flow out of the expectations that sets. So our relationships with the LSAPs are extremely interconnected. There is a lot of history and a lot of complexity and a high level of priority because they are one of the ways that we're connected is that we're serving the same members. Their members are our members, and we're all working towards the same mission of, you know, increasing and improving resource sharing in the state. Each of the 6 LSAP organizations are operated independently and governed independently by, you know, groups of representatives from their member libraries. So many of the current LSAPs began as departments of library systems, which is kind of an oversimplification of how each one of the 6 of them landed where they are today. Julie knows. But you know, when online catalogs first became available on the market, it was even more expensive than it is now, and it's still a considerable expense. And so the regional library systems were encouraged to start these consortial catalogs. So like I said, some of them were system departments, but over the years, some also formed independently. There are now 6. Not all of them were LSAPs when they formed. And when I started at Rails, there were like 10 or 11 consortia in our service area. So there has been, you know, there are a lot of stories of mergers and splits and everything that has got into all of the shifts, and the shifts have been really significant. But you know, when it comes down to it, there's always been this close relationship between systems and the consortia. And our services are complementary in that way. You know, our delivery supports their interlibrary loan activities. They help, you know, extend our mission into the state, and it's all kind of articulated and codified in multiple layers of like our organizational structures. You know, we've got the Library System Act, the administrative rules that I referred to, our mission statement articulates that, you know, it's literally libraries connected to each other. And goal 1 of our strategic plan is, and specifically objective 4 is the one that kind of directly addresses our support to the LSAPs and our work with them. And then the way that you see that working at the governance level is through the consortia committee, which the charge is in your packet. And that kind of establishes the formal like governance level connection between the Rails and the LSAP organizations, and the representatives on that committee are chosen by each of the consortial organizations, and it's generally a mix of staff and board members. They meet quarterly, and you will see, and when that committee meets, we include written reports from each of the consortia, or the, you know, the ones that submit reports to us. And we then share that report with the board. So you will see that in your packets on a quarterly basis. So what do the LSAPs kind of look like? You know, who does it include? A significant but not majority percentage of Rails members. We currently have about 30% of Rails libraries in a shared catalog consortium, which I, you know, specify as distinct from LSAPs, because we also have Harley, the consortium of academic and research libraries, and their iShare catalog, which is statewide and operated by the University of Illinois system. There's a very different funding structure, but you know, they're included in this count of libraries that are participating in a catalog consortium. And then the rest of the libraries in Rails are either standalone, you know, they maintain their own catalog software, or they don't have catalog software. And you know, a little further down the document, you'll see that the LSAPs primarily serve public libraries, but also are multi-type, which has always been a big priority in Illinois, that multi-type resource sharing. But when it comes down to it, you know, we encourage LSAP membership. We obviously support the LSAPs financially and you know, conceptually, but we also support our members. You know, it's a local decision. So we support all of our member libraries in making whatever decision is best for their communities, that allows them to share, you know, as generously and sustainably as they can. So, you know, there's no difference in our ends. So the LSAPs all provide kind of roughly the same mix of core services, but then the services they provide beyond that vary pretty dramatically. But like I said, the core of it is the shared ILS software, and then someone to manage that ILS software and the relationship with the vendor, which has a considerable value in terms of labor, as well as the negotiating power that it can give all of these libraries in a collective to a greater degree than they might have as individuals negotiating pricing and services and everything. And then so there's this shared collection that is cataloged in the software, and all of the member libraries in an LSAP share most of their materials, although again, you know, there are plenty of local decisions, and not every piece of a library's collection is going to be, you know, shipped out and shared. So the LSAPs roughly serve specific geographic areas, which you can see hopefully in the resource sharing app in your packet. It is a huge document. So it's hard to fit into an 8.5 by 11 kind of resolution. But, you could, at least the colors kind of show you the divisions. They roughly reflect previous regional library system boundaries or other kind of regional groupings that have developed over the years. And this map is current as of 2019. So there are plenty of new LSAT members. The memberships there's always a little bit of churn in membership and growth. But it still roughly accurately illustrates their geographical coverage. And so I have a summary of the participation and links to the LSAP websites where websites exist. All of them are extremely unique. You can see the range of size. And additionally, when you look at the services they provide, they're all very different from each other. And so how do we support them? It's primarily through 2 grant programs, one of which is aimed at helping support their operations, and then one towards membership growth. And the support that we've provided over the years has evolved significantly. When Rails formed, it was all based on historical relationships with the predecessor system. So there was a lot of variation, and independent consortia did not receive Rails support. So we have worked to kind of level the playing field in that way. And now all of the consortia that are within the Rails service area are LSAPs and receive Rails support. So the support grant is the operational support one. It distributes $2.25 million of Rails funding annually. And that is primarily financial, although some of the LSAPs receive services as part of their award. And the allocations of that 2.25 million are determined through a formula that has also evolved. And the most recent iteration of it is definitely the highest quality one we've had, because we have a data analysis manager on staff now, and Grant has done a great job working with that formula and collaborating with me on the administration of the program, how the funds are allocated. So the timeline is a little interesting because we announced the awards in October, and which is before our budget cycle starts. But the LSAT budgets are their processes are well underway by late October. So it comes kind of on the late side for them. So, we've tried to split the difference as much as possible, but we've made these awards and they're all conditioned on the availability of Rails funding. Because they just sort of then hold for a while until they make it into our budget several months later. We also collect a lot of data about these groups and have recently kind of expanded our data collection to include a greater range and help us kind of understand the LSAPs and their services better. And so you'll be hearing more about that in the next year or so. We just got that started with this current application process. So then the other grant program is the Catalog Membership Grant, and that is obviously the one that supports membership growth. That is dedicated to offsetting the one-time costs to a library of joining a consortium. There are often very significant vendor fees, tens of thousands of dollars that isn't attainable for every library. I mean, even extremely well-funded libraries, that is a really big chunk of money to spend at one time, and has proved to be prohibitive for many libraries. So we have made 73 awards since the program began in fiscal year 2015. And it's almost $2 million total at this point, 1.84 million. And we have 3 awards that are pending review right now for an additional $140,000. And that's also supported 3 group migrations, kind of getting back to the landscape changes. We have kind of helped on the financial side of making some of these mergers and consolidations happen. There's another deadline for fiscal 24. That's April 15th. And that the budget process for the way that this grant program fits into the budget process varies from year to year. We gather information about pending projects, generally an LSAP or me, someone knows that a library is thinking about membership long before like the process actually starts. Because there's just a lot of lead time kind of at every phase of the process. So we gather that information from year to year in terms of like what's likely to happen that year. And then we try to budget as generously as possible for those projects. And we've been lucky enough to, for the most part, be able to cover that and give full awards. I think there's only been 1 year that budget requests or, that funding requests exceeded our budget amount, and it was not by very much. And so in that case, we gave a partial award that was almost 100% of the request. But that program has seen a lot of success and continued success. There was a lot of pent up demand when we started, and so we had a much higher volume of awards, but each year we tend to have at least 3 awards. So you'll hear more about them as they are made and announced. So that's what I have about LSAPs. Are there any questions? I know it's a lot.
I will just add, we used to include a lot of this information as part of the orientation in July, and it's so hard to absorb some of this, especially for folks who are new to some of this information. So we wanted this year to be able to give a more concentrated presentation from Anne during the board report. But if there are questions that you have that you'd also like to ask after the meeting, we're happy to answer whatever we can.
I want to give a shout out to the clever person who came up with the rail car data. That one's
Yes, that's Grant.
pretty good.
Yeah. It took me a long time to leave the S out when I would type
Yeah.
the acronym, but yeah, really great, fun acronym there. Yeah.
Well, and I did read that that schools can be members, and maybe I'm looking for, you don't have to name names, but give me like a for instance, for instance, this is how a school is part of one of these LSAPs or consortium.
I think of the Rock River Library Consortium. They are actually majority schools. And the director of the Sterling Public Library, Jennifer Slaney, is amazing. She's at the helm of that group, and they are just a great example of what the purpose of an LSAP and the way that libraries can share resources in a way that is uniquely suited to them. They're all in the Sterling area, which is just surrounded by, unserved areas and very rural. So the ability that the schools have to join with into the Rock River Consortium, that they've got Jennifer and the vendor kind of maintaining the catalog. The schools in that group are also often very, strapped for funding. Not like every school isn't, but it vastly increases the number of resources that their students have available to them. In a way that would be obviously very difficult for them to attain on their own, even with, something like OCLC, the amount of labor that would take. And just the way that it expands their access. They really wouldn't be able to get anywhere else, and they get a lot of support especially from the more strongly funded public libraries in the group. That kind of answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
There aren't a ton of schools participating in LSAPs, but that's a great example of one. Any other questions?
And this
Yes.
is Tom in East Peoria. And being chair of the consortia committee, I'd like to thank you and your staff for all the information you give us at the meetings and prior to the meetings to make some great decisions and things like that. So thank everyone on your staff for their fine work.
Well, thank you, Tom. And thanks to you for being such a wonderful chair. It is a great group. All right, so I'll move on to broadband if we're ready, but again, reach out as this information overload percolates and any questions come to mind. So totally switching gears, although broadband is obviously very important to running and being able to access a shared library catalog. And, you know, we have libraries in LSAPs and, you know, just in our service area who have a hard time staying connected to their ILS software if they don't have fast enough or high enough quality internet speeds, because the software is extremely powerful and it's kind of optimized for faster connections, and there's a lot happening. And there have actually been a lot of issues with libraries dropping their connections to like the Prairie Cat catalog, and the vendors like, well, that's how it works. I don't know what to tell you. So the state of Illinois first, and now also the federal government has dedicated historic levels of funding towards broadband expansion to areas that are unserved or underserved by their internet providers. And then also to improve digital equity, because getting the fiber and the connections into the buildings is, you know, just one step in the battle. There are additional challenges when it comes to access to devices, the skills needed to use those devices and to participate in all of these life activities that happen online, like education and healthcare, community safety, you know, 911 systems, even agriculture. So the two federal programs that are really where the big money is coming from right now is the Broadband Equity and Deployment, or BEAD program. Over $1 billion has been allocated to the state of Illinois through formula funding for that grant. And it's getting closer to the point where that money will actually get into the state's hands. It is just a massive project that the NTIA is running, and it's all kind of happening in real time. So there's been a lot of shifts and changes. We don't have all of the dates yet for anything, but you know, there's all this funding in process. And the Digital Equity Act kind of follows behind that timeline wise. That program will allocate a total of $1.4 billion through a formula again to all the 50 states. So the allocations for that program haven't been announced yet, but Illinois is going to get a chunk of that. And then there is an additional $1.2 billion in competitive funding for competitive grants that will follow. And that, you know, these two programs, like I said, are not just about building out broadband, but making sure that people can access it with devices and skills and do it affordably. So both of these programs require the states to produce plans that must be publicized for comment before being finalized. The BEAD plan public comment period ended a few weeks ago. And the digital equity plan is going to be just fascinating and include a lot about library services. I am lobbying for every single library in the state to be included in the asset inventory, which is one of the required components, because libraries provide digital equity and digital inclusion services as core services. So we have been working at Rails, have been working with our colleagues at Heartland, the Illinois Heartland Library System, and Carly on kind of a coalition to help sort of build that statewide library voice in these issues, and try and influence the decisions as much as we can. Libraries are so important to these efforts, but nobody knows libraries from the outside as well as we do, and particularly when it comes to the needs that libraries have for the capacity it will take to sustainably offer services in addition to accessing broadband. We have plenty of libraries that don't have broadband or don't have the technology that they need to meet the demands that they experience. So the letter in your packet is one of the products of our collaboration with Heartland and Carly. And as you can see, we've done that also with the support and encouragement of the Illinois State Library and the Illinois Library Association, as well as staff from within the Secretary of State's office, and Anna Clausen, their library liaison. Secretary of State's office has a library liaison, and she is the one who developed and administered the Public Library Internet Survey, which is has closed, and analysis, we're just emailing about it today. Like, analysis is starting, and the Illinois Office of Broadband, the Illinois Broadband Lab, which is like kind of their research partnership, have all been requesting this data. So it's all happening. And we have information about it from our coalition at broadbandforlibraries.com, which we'll be keeping updated, and things are going to change, but we needed to get it up really fast before ILA, and Carly helped us with that. So I'm going to leave it there. That's a big topic, and I will be speaking about it more at the Universal Service and Advocacy Committees, in the coming couple months, and then getting a lot of word out there once the digital equity plan is released, encouraging people to read it and participate in public comment. So there'll just be a lot more coming out about that. I'm happy to answer any questions, or you can follow up with me.
As I'm sure you can hear, Anne has a tremendous amount of learned expertise around this issue and has really guided a lot of materials that have been created around this through our coalition. So I want to thank her for all the work that she has put into this, but also this is a lot of money. And it is so important that libraries are considered in terms of what is happening in Illinois libraries and the work that's happening, especially around the digital equity piece. There's so much that can happen here. So I thank you so much for this presentation, and all of the work that's going into this. But please continue to watch this, especially heading into January and the comment period on digital equity, because I think that's where a lot of difference can be made.
Yeah, and I should mention specifically that, kind of medium and longer term, there will be grant funding that libraries are eligible for. And we think that there will be much greater potential for impact, at a collective kind of multi-agency level. So, library systems, the kind of consortial and statewide level are well positioned to do that. So that's one of the other things that we've been talking about in our little coalition.
I have a question. How do you advertise the comment periods and the availability of these funds to the libraries that do not have access to broadband? Like, do they get hard mail, or, how are they dependent on having access to technology in order to find out about these funds, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, so that touches on like a few things. I mean, I think that question you know, about any topic, you know, how do you reach the libraries that are staffed by like one part-time director in rural areas and might be not served or underserved by broadband? It's really hard. Like, I'm not sure anyone really has the best answer about that. I know it's something that Kendall has struggled with a lot, for example, getting communication out to all of the RSA members. But that is something, you know, that we are always working to do at Rails as well. The Illinois Broadband Lab is partnered with the Office of Broadband on like research and mapping projects, but also community engagement. So that is another required component of these plans is engaging with communities directly and incorporating their input. And so they've done a lot of, they did a lot of listening sessions, both virtually and in person. So I think they worked, you know, as locally as possible to get the word out for the listening sessions, but I think it's a challenge for them too. They got a planning grant to fund this work, but you know, they're trying to reach millions of people in this huge state. So I'm not sure that, you know, everyone in Illinois was readily able to see this information and to learn about it. So, you know, I think it's really important for us to do what we can to get the word out there to libraries because they're not necessarily seeing it anywhere else.
A lot of signal boosting,
Right.
a lot of e-news, a lot of Rails Minute, a lot of every thing we can do.
Actively tracking the changes on the Office of Broadband website. Like, I'm on the Broadband Advisory Council, which is their like the Office of Broadband's advisory group, and I still don't necessarily hear things. You know, they're a state agency, and it's always a struggle.
Good question.
All right, any other questions? Thank you, Ann. Next up is Monica with the Rails Monthly Report.
Well, hi, everybody. Feels like we just met, but a lot has happened since our last meeting in October. But I wanted to start our discussion for the Rails report related to an email that I sent out to you all earlier this week. Hopefully some of you have had the opportunity to see it, but it has to do specifically with the Paid Leave for All Workers Act. So I know many of you who are connected in some way with public libraries are already aware of some of these changes. There was a lot of discussion about this law legislatively throughout the entire last kind of veto session. There was a lot of hope, I think, especially from the coalition around the Illinois Municipal League and some other spaces, that there might be potential better understanding of some of the law moving forward, or maybe some potential exemptions. But the legislative session has now ended, and it is clear that libraries will need to be able to make sure that we are compliant with the law on January 1st. So as you may have seen, if you clicked through to the Department of Labor's kind of discussion of this law, they are still working on creating some of the guidance for that law that's beginning on January 1st, which is why we're kind of seeing some of these changes so late in the game, including to all of you. So this is our last meeting, you know, before January 1st begins. So we still want to continue to follow our regular procedure, which is that any change in a policy goes to the policy committee, that they have time to look at those changes, suggest changes, that we bring it to legal counsel, you know, that all of those pieces come in. But that does take time, which means that we wouldn't have an actual policy change ready to bring to you until our January meeting at the end of January. But we know that there are certain provisions of the law that we do understand pretty well. And I'll say Sam Daly, who's our HR manager, is also here for us today if we have questions, that are things we have to have available beginning on January 1st. And those things include that 40 hours of paid leave for full-time and the opportunity for anyone who's part-time in our organization to accrue up to 40 hours. That does require a change from us, because here at Rails, we have a 37.5 hour week for full-time. And so our personal time, for example, is also currently at 37.5 hours to reflect that full week. There is no provision in the law to allow for some of those changes, at least at this time. So that means we have to be able to put in 40 hours on January 1st, and we have to allow for an accrual process that allows for our part-time workers to accrue up to 40 hours. So what I'm bringing to you today is just potential discussion around whether or not we are comfortable with making those changes in our own payroll system on January 1st to be compliant with the law, but that we will still continue to look at the policy because there are still, unfortunately, some pieces that we are trying to understand how to be legally compliant, especially as it comes to the differences between how some provisions of the law, especially around reporting. So when people say that they're going to take this time, how they have to report what the time is for, that's going to require a change in our policy. And there are also some potential it butts up against, I should say, some other legal protections and provisions that we have to be able to follow through when we're aware of certain things for medical leave, for example. So we still have to seek additional legal guidance. Our legal counsel will be looking at some of those things, and we will, of course, bring those back to the policy committee as they're available. But we do, regardless, need to be able to make this change on January 1st. So I wanted to bring that open to discussion for the board and see if anyone had any issues with us making that change, but continuing along the process as normally for the policy change. Any additional discussion, objections?
Great way to do it. And then, you know, if the policy that we pass is more generous, it can always be made retroactive for the staff to be made whole from January 1st forward. So I think it's a great way to move forward.
Yes. Okay. If there's no additional discussion, we'll move on to the other areas of the Rails report. But I thank you all for the opportunity to bring that to you. I did want to note, you may have noticed there are some changes to the format of the Rails report, especially if you've been here since July, and that is because Dan Bostrom is currently in his new role as our Director of Marketing and Communications. And so he's been able to take over the general Rails report, which brings back to you some of the opportunities, including the top 3. So I always want to call to mind these kind of top 3 items that appear in your Rails report, because this tells you the things that we're really saying, hey, talking to other Rails members, you're getting the word out, make sure you're mentioning these things, make sure that you know about them. So that is now newly included again. And thank you, Dan, for your work on the report this month. You did that with very little lead time and turnaround. So we really appreciate that as well. I also wanted to note, not appearing in your packet because it just happened this week, we had the opportunity to attend the Carly annual meeting yesterday and provided a lot of support and talking points for that academic group about all the important pieces around broadband. We reported back to that group about those important pieces about broadband, and then Ellen Poppett and I sat together and hosted a talk table where people from the academic library community asked their questions, talked about the issues that they have around broadband. And it was really a great day. Greg McCormick was there as well to speak about many things with the Illinois State Library. And so it was a great opportunity to connect with that group. So I wanted to thank Ann Craig for inviting our groups to come for the day, and then also for the opportunity to present around those important broadband issues.
Shout out to Monica for taking one for the entire team when the rest of the 3 of us couldn't come.
Thank you. Yeah. It all worked out. It was all good. But in your packet, you will see the note about Public Act 103-100. We will be discussing later in your agenda a resolution that would make us compliant with that new law. We've also got Greg McCormick here today who will be talking about some of those changes. And thank you, Greg, very much for also speaking at our member update that we had on November 15th. If you were able to attend that, he also came and spoke to those pieces of the law as well as the statewide online resources. We are also going to be meeting with Heartland next week to discuss the potential of a joint board meeting in spring 2024. So there's a lot of interest in moving that forward. Because we haven't done this in so long, I would love to know from any of you, are there things that you are hoping especially to see on an agenda that you're hoping to discuss with them? So if anyone has anything that they'd like to note right now, I would love to open that up for discussion. But if you also have ideas later that you'd like to share, we're just at the beginning stages of putting some of that together. So there is time to share your thoughts later as well. So does anyone have anything that they'd like to share?
It's been so long since we've had a joint meeting. This might not be a relevant question, but what have those looked like in the past? What was the general?
It's a great question, actually, because we've been, Emily and I especially. And Emily was here for the last one and helped with that. So there has been in the past either the opportunity to have your regular business meeting and then in addition, have another meeting. Or you can incorporate, some of the basic things, your approval of your minutes, your financials into the meeting and kind of have both business parts of the meeting and have that be your meeting for the month. So we have not yet talked to Heartland to see if they have a preference in terms of how they want to approach that. But in the past, we had regular meetings for the month and then a separate meeting. That's right, Emily? Yeah. Is that your question kind of about format or?
Yeah, and I think that makes sense because there's so many things like approving minutes and just routine business
Yes.
that, don't really overlap.
Yes, absolutely.
I can send the past agendas and you guys can review them and then if any ideas or questions, I'll just email me.
That's a great idea, Emily. This was a goal of the board for a long time. Some of you have been on the Rails board for long enough to remember that, and there was a lot of hope that this would happen. So I'm really excited for the opportunity. I've also had the opportunity just to meet a couple of Heartland board members recently who also seem really excited about coming together, and that's been really nice to see. Well, if you think of anything or there is anything you want us to address, please, by all means, reach out. I do also want to note that the ISLAC committee met on November 1st. Again, we do have Greg McCormick with us today, so I'll let him mostly share some of that information, but it was a good meeting and there was a lot of information covered, including, of course, information about broadband, about the Secretary of State's budget, looks at how the Secretary will approach the License to Read Act and some of the abilities that he has through that License to Read Act to negotiate for ebooks on behalf of libraries, some additional discussion about statewide databases for libraries, which is of great interest across Rails, and then the open educational resources piece for Carly, which there's $3 million that is included in the budget to mostly focus on open educational resources for academic libraries. At the meeting yesterday at Carly, they had a long list of all of the OERs that have currently been approved through the SCORES project, including one at Northern, at Gwen's Library University. So it's been really exciting to see some of those changes and excited to see where those go. I also just wanted to note that the PPC did have their meeting on November 6th, and a bill has been filed that is related to that treasure bond piece. If you'll recall, that was brought forward by Rails, and in the bill, the language is to move the recommendation for the treasure bond reduction from 50% to 10%. So when we brought that to you before, the discussion was, would it be 10% or 25%? They landed on 10% in terms of the overall cost, which would result in more savings for Illinois libraries. So we're hopeful for that moving forward. And of course, you'll have lots of opportunity to hear about that at the upcoming Illinois Library Association legislative meetups. If you can, we would love to encourage you to attend one. There's 5 in the Rails territory that are happening November 29th through December 6th. And the last day to register is November 24th. So if you're planning to go, don't lose sight of that deadline. They are not allowing for any in-person same day registration. So just make sure you register ahead of time or let us know if you'd like to attend. Any questions about anything in the Rails report for now? Okay. Thank you all.
All right, Monica. Next, we'll be moving on to the Illinois State Library report. So I'll turn it over to Greg.
Well, thank you, Alex. It's nice to join you. Monica asked, and similar to what you heard from Anne, that in addition to the State Library report and update, that I provide at least a brief and high-level orientation to the board, to the new board regarding, or the newer board at this point, I should say, regarding the state library, its role in state government and its relationship to the library system and libraries in the state. So within the State Library Act itself, the state library is charged with dual functions. We are an actual operating library. I've had to answer that question before at a library system meeting of whether there was even a building for the state library. It is more than an administrative agency, but we do support an operating library for state offices, state officers, the General Assembly, the judiciary, all state agencies, bodies, and commissions. But then where we're most engaged with everyone else in your room and with the regional library system is we are also charged with supporting, promoting, and implementing library services on a statewide basis. There are 5 divisions at the state library, including the administrative offices, our public services section, and library operations. It's the traditional operation of the library, as you can imagine. Our government documents section, which is for both federal and state documents, our Talking Book and Braille services. And what you're most familiar with here at the state library is the Library Development Group and our literacy office. And I do want to note at this point that Mandy Saya from the Library Development Group has joined me as well, and will maybe be taking over for me as I have to, or not for the report, but as I have to leave to another meeting here in a while. For the first function, operation of the state library, we issue cards to all state employees, of course, but we also currently, and I say currently because I think this is going to be changing and expanding, we do issue cards to any resident of the state who also holds a public library card for borrowing purposes here at the state library. We maintain a 164,000 square foot facility. I hope that some of you at least were able to come to the state library at the recent reception we held as part of the Illinois Library Association conference. We have 5 million items in our, or over 5 million items in our collection. We have what is supposed to be the complete collection of all state of Illinois documents. And we're now, of course, trying to collect many of those in an electronic format. And we act as the regional depository for the federal documents for the state of Illinois. In 2018, the Legislative Research Unit, the collection for their researchers was moved here to the state library. So even that staff who supports the General Assembly now comes to the state library to access their own materials. And it's great to have that function here at the state library as well. Our FY24 operating budget is just over $4.7 million. As far as our support of implementing statewide library services, this is where the Talking Book and Braille service and us being the regional library for the blind comes into place. All circulation of digital cartridges statewide is conducted here from the state library for the registered patrons of that service. All machine readers that are issued from the National Library Service of the Library of Congress are supplied to patrons of the state through the state library, and we mail those out to each of the registered patrons. I'm happy to report we've received or attained a real achievement here where our entire circulation has now moved to duplication on demand. We will no longer be maintaining the library, the digital collection in our stacks that we have in the past. Each day, as circulation is to be made to patrons requesting such, customized cartridges are created for them. Up to 10 titles on an individual cartridge are prepared and then mailed to them. It's amazing the time this saves as far as going through the state library stacks and pulling individual titles and then getting them out into the mail for them. All Readers Advisor services for the Regional Library for the Blind outside of the city of Chicago is also conducted here at the State Library. Regarding our role with others and what we do across the state, most of that is found in the Library System Act. The state librarian and his staff is charged with administering all provisions of the act and are also to prescribe rules and regulations that are necessary to carry out all provisions therein. Here, of course, is where the library systems are established in law, and while they are separate from the state with their own governing bodies, the state librarian is charged with oversight through administrative rules that create the basic guidelines for library system membership. And it also includes the final approval of membership decisions made by each regional library system. It's here also where there are minimum services defined that a library system should be providing to its membership, the requirements for the library system's annual plans of service or your operating plans. The board each year takes action on that. The requirements for the library system's annual reports, which were just filed with the state library in September. All of this is to assure that there is a level of cooperation amongst all types of libraries for sharing of library resources across the state. And this is very different from the very limited responsibilities delegated to the state librarian in the Local Library Act or the Public Library District Act of 1991. However, it's also within the Library System Act that the grant funding of all types is authorized not only for the library systems, but also for public library per capita and equalization grants, the school library grants, technology grants, which are a very broad umbrella of funding that would include things such as the ILDS, which connects the two regional library systems and supports the delivery to all the academic institutions in the state. Public library construction grants. And I'm not going to go through the entire list of that, but in fiscal year 2024, the state library has appropriations exceeding $87 million for library services that we will be administering. That doesn't mean it's all new allocations. Some of that is recurring funding, but we're still following the reporting from those grant programs and making expenditures from allocations that occurred in previous fiscal years. We will also provide an additional $5.7 million to support literacy programs this fiscal year through the library development and literacy division here. And we also assist the Secretary of State's office with administering over $4 million in special license plate and direct appropriation grants for non-library and literacy purposes. So we do extend ourselves a bit beyond what is typically charged for the state library. But I hope that at least gives you a brief overview of our relationship with you. And if there are any questions or anyone would like to follow up, please feel free to reach out to me directly after the meeting. Regarding the state library report itself, and yes, what was reported to the State Library Advisory Committee, the e-resources or database package for libraries, I'm pleased to announce that has moved forward to the procurement stage. Early in, well, almost immediately when he took office, Secretary Janulius embraced the idea of including $5 million to allow his office to acquire a statewide database package for libraries of all types. We are excited to see how this plays out. We have worked very closely with the state libraries of Michigan, New York, and Indiana, looking at what they're providing to their libraries, what that cost is. And we're very hopeful, based upon the appropriation allocated and what we know from the results of their efforts, on what can be provided for libraries in the state. We looked very closely at what the documents for the procurement from the state of Michigan were, made some very significant adaptations to Illinois. We're a larger state. We have more libraries, but very similar to the state of New York, we also have 1 million people who are non-residents, and one of the goal, or non-residents of public library service areas. One of the goals of this procurement, as it is in the state of New York, is that at least on a very limited basis, some library services would be extended to those non-residents through this database package. We will be working out the details of how that would occur yet, but we should be able to make an impact on that effort in our state through acquisition of this database package. It's certainly not providing complete public library services to anyone, but would make some resources available. So more to come on that. Our goal is to have an announcement in early spring on what that package will look like. We're encouraging libraries not to make any decisions locally yet. Please don't cancel any of your own subscriptions until you know what is contained in this and how it's going to best serve you. But ultimately, we are hopeful that this will make an impact on the budgets of those who have afforded this already, but also provide access to such to many libraries that have nothing currently. We have good data on what has happened in the public libraries, and as of 2021, 45% of the public libraries in our state had 0 database packages like this available to their patrons. So we do hope this will make a significant difference. Regarding Public Act 103-100, the book banning legislation, this is something I think everyone is quite familiar with at this point. Where we are at this stage, our office was charged with adopting administrative rules for implementation of the provisions of the act. We are at the second notice period for that. The hearing with the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules is set for December 12. We do not anticipate any questions or any changes. The rules for this were very straightforward and consistent with what the legislation said. The regional library systems, and I do want to thank everyone, did a great job of making sure their membership was aware of the comment period. We did respond to comments received during first notice, but I will say by and large, those comments were supportive of what was included in the administrative rules. And those comments that we received that weren't quite supportive were really taking issue with the law and not the content of the rules itself. But this will be effective January 1. So any grant applications that we receive for funding from the Secretary of State's office for library purposes, certification of compliance will be required from all library applicants, school, publics, academics. In the rare instance of a special library, the regional library systems, though, will also have to comply with this because of the ebook collections that are held by the regional library systems, and why you will be taking action later today. The public library per capita and equalization grant information, as well as the construction grant information. Our web pages are now being updated. We will be making an announcement of those applications and the availability of such very, very soon. They will include the new certification documents that will require the applicant to assure that they have adopted the American Library Association's Library Bill of Rights, indicating that the material should not be prescribed or removed because of partisan or doctrinal disapproval, or provide a written policy or procedure, because we understand that in many cases, especially with the school districts in the state, it is procedures and not policies, that there is a policy in place that is consistent with that within the Library Bill of Rights, and those will be submitted for review as part of the grant application. A part of that certification as well is that the applicant is assuring that the state librarian or the state library can review any decisions regarding reconsideration of library materials that are made during the term of the grant award or expenditure of the grant funds. It still may be the case that a library does determine that material is not meeting the needs of its community. This does not mean all material will stay in a library, but material would not be removed because of outside pressure necessarily. So it will allow us to follow up with that. Regarding the License to Read Act and the discussion, we plan on first, before we move much further forward, is convening a discussion with the regional library systems, Carly, possibly some of the other consortia, regarding how and best we might approach this. The intent is not to step on anyone's toes or work against an effort that the library systems may have already made or Carly may have made in negotiating pricing for ebooks for member libraries. So we will be convening that discussion as soon as possible. And I'm sure you will be hearing more from Monica and or other members of Rails regarding this very soon. The open educational resources piece, yes, there is $3 million in the Secretary's budget this year. The recommendation from the State Library Advisory Committee to the Secretary is really to continue along the lines of the $2 million that Carly has for the Illinois Scores Project, and not deviate significantly from that, but to amplify and build upon that investment. And we will see where this takes us and what the future holds for this. This is a longer term effort, as much discussion occurred yesterday at the Carly annual meeting. So that's really all I have for today. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Greg. Are there questions for Greg from any location?
All right, thank you, Greg. We'll be moving on to new business, starting with adoption of the ALA Bill of Rights. Monica?
Thank you, Alex. So as you just heard Greg talking about, it's a nice segue for us. Required by Public Act 103-100 is that anyone who's applying for any grant from the Illinois State Library has to be in compliance in one of two ways. And the first way is to adopt the American Library Association's Library Bill of Rights. So we wanted to make sure, one, that we were in compliance with the act before we move forward, but also that we could create a resolution. So if there are any libraries in the area who are looking at what a resolution to adopt that act might look like, they could certainly look at this as an option for something that could be discussed. But we are, of course, bringing this to this board just for discussion for whether or not you are in support of going ahead and adopting the American Library Association's Library Bill of Rights.
We are just doing this, because I think my library's already had it for 6 years or 7.
I think it's mostly related to the fact that the systems don't do much collection development. And so that though we do have the ebook programs, and there is a procedure around the collection development for those programs, it's not a policy. And so I think that that's why it's important that we enshrine it, as a resolution rather than, since there's no existing policy.
Will this be accessible for other libraries? Or are you gonna have it in the website somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, it's there right now as part of the board packet, but we can also find a way to put it on the website and other spaces after this meeting, certainly.
Approve the resolution to adopt the ALA Library Bill of Rights.
I second.
Okay, second. All right, thank you. We don't need a roll call for this. So all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. The resolution is adopted. Next, we have Monica again with the org chart revision.
Thank you, Alex. So we do have a revision to the organizational chart. The last time that you saw this chart was in June 2023, because after we approved changes according to the budget, we did bring that to you at that point. We do have a change, and this is related to something that you're going to hear about a little bit later in our agenda, but it's related to supervisory responsibility manager status, because as you will note from reading your packet, and of course, if you're aware, there is a lot going on with the RSA Independence Project right now. We will talk about that, as we have said, later, but Kendall and Alyssa and RSA have been working really hard on all the next steps to move RSA into sort of their next phase of independence. But it does require a lot of meetings, discussions around communication, ways that Rails can help to make the process for independence as smooth and simple as possible. And then just a lot of discussions about moving administrative support, things like that. Anne has done a really good job over the years in terms of working with that RSA group. And you can see she has a lot of kind of varied responsibility in her side of the org chart. But we thought moving into this next phase that it made sense for Joe in his new capacity as Associate Executive Director to work more closely with RSA as part of that process. So that's the major change you see in terms of the organizational structure that's listed here. There are, of course, also additions in terms of the names that you see on the chart. And so that includes Joe in his role. We have 3 drivers and driver floaters, 2 in Bolingbrook and 1 in East Peoria, and then Dan Bostrom in his new role as Marketing and Communications Director. So I'd like to ask for the approval of the org chart, but first, is there any discussion or any questions about the org chart as presented?
We're gonna have to do this again if someone gets a promotion.
We don't do it every time someone gets a promotion, but anytime there's either a change because there's a new position added or a change to the org chart, we'll bring it to you with all the changes and let you know any of the changes that have happened because of promotions, new roles that have been filled, etc. No, not every time.
So until then, we have a motion to approve the Rails org chart revisions.
So moved. Second, Karen.
Jennifer and Karen, thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Next up is Joe with an update on the RSA Independence Project.
Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon, everyone. A couple of minutes, we'll pass things over to Kendall so you can hear some updates on his end. But
just for kind of background, and I'm so grateful that Anne both did the LSAP overview today and she spoke before me, so I don't have to remind you what an LSAP is, what it stands for, and did such a great job of doing that. But just to highlight a couple things as background, it's worth a reminder that at the time of the merger that formed Rails, Rails had 4 LSAPs that we directly supported because 4 of our predecessor systems had LSAPs at the time. So we're talking about SWAN, which was part of Metropolitan Library System, Magic as part of DuPage Library System. We had Prairie Cat as part of PALS, Prairie Area, and then of course RSA as part of Alliance Library System. So Rails at that time supported the LSAPs through a lot of different things like IT support, administrative support, office space, et cetera. But over the years, we've seen the LSAPs transitioning to independence from Rails, at least from an operational sort of standpoint. And the most recent transition being Prairie Cat, which did their sort of transitioning independence of staffing in fiscal year 2019. So with RSA now as the final LSAP that is staffed by Rails, I think we view the Independence Project as largely representing an expected and sort of natural progression within the evolution of LSAPs. So Rails currently provides RSA's share of that LSAP grant that you heard Anne talk about through things like personnel, IT support, facilities, et cetera, which contrasts with the largely financial support provided to the other LSAPs through that grant program. So our hope, and I think expectation, is that RSA's independence from Rails operations is just going to provide, better alignment with all the other LSAPs. And I think in doing that creates better pathways and easier, pathways towards additional statewide collaborations that we might pursue, as well as the own sort of sustainability for RSA. So RSA began planning for this following a model not dissimilar from those undertaken by Prairie Cat and SWAN. And I would say particularly in the last 6 months to a year, Kendall, who is of course executive director at RSA, his team, the RSA board, have made a lot of good progress towards this project. So we wanted to give Kendall an opportunity there from East Peoria to share with us some of those details. So Kendall, welcome, anything you have to share, and I know you'd be happy to take any questions at the end as well.
Sure. So between you and Ann, I just cut a third of what I was going to talk about. So it makes it easier to hit my expected timing. I do want to start off with the fact that RSA, the staff, myself, our membership, and the RSA board have been and remain very happy with our relationship, both with the Alliance Library System back in the day and with Rails. And it's been very good for us. It's helped us keep our prices down. It's helped us kind of build off of the economies of scale of Rails to provide a lot of services that we probably wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. One thing I'll note is that RSA does pay 100% of our costs to Rails. So at the end of every fiscal year, the finance staff goes through and they look at how much staffing costs, what our percentage of the building is, what our percentage of HR, finance, and all of those internal Rails duties and functional areas, how much RSA impacted them and how much the cost was for that. And if we have underpaid for that year, we will cut a check. If we overpaid for the year, then Rails cuts us a check. Last year, Rails cut us a check because we had a position that was open for about, 8 months or so. And so we were a little bit under budget for the year. So it's nice that we have that because it gives us a baseline to plan for full independence. Now we know it's going to be more expensive to be fully independent, but we are currently paying all of our costs to Rails. So we're kind of sort of revenue neutral from that standpoint. Let me give you a bit of history on RSA itself. I started in RSA in 2005. It was kind of a hot mess. Nobody knew it was a hot mess, but it was a hot mess. I got here, we immediately kicked off a process to do a system migration so that all of our large libraries did not pull out and leave RSA. And in 2007, when we went live on that new system, we had 75 libraries, public schools, academics, and special libraries that were fully automated in our old system. And we had 98 libraries who were union listing libraries. And a union listing library just has the major parts of their collections cataloged in the shared system so that they appear online. But union listing libraries aren't automated. They don't check library materials in and out through the system. They couldn't place holds on anything because the system didn't know anything about the material other than that it existed. They didn't get reports. It's basically just, here's a place to store my stuff so that our patrons can see it online. And my goal at the time of the migration was that every library in RSA should be automated. And there, honestly, even in 2007, it didn't make a lot of sense for libraries just to have their catalogs reflected in our system and not use this for anything else. So in 2006, when we did our migration contract, RSA worked with Cersei Dynex to set up what we called at the time the basic online tier of service, which was a cut down tier of what Cersei Dynex provided normally. So it was cataloging, checkouts, reports, ILL functionality, and online catalog, but not all of the other fun extras that came with the automation system. And that was the first time that had ever happened in like library history. We were the first place to do that, and we were able to do it because we were big. And in 2006, the library market was in bad shape and everybody wanted our business. And since then, many, many other library consortia around the country and around the world have piggybacked off that idea. And it's done a lot of good for a lot of other consortia. And one final note, when I talk a minute about our makeup, the Alliance Library System goal was that every library in Alliance Library System would be a part of RSA and automated in our library system. And that was what we strove for. Alliance gave grants, the state library gave grants pre-merger times to get lots of libraries joining and automated in RSA. So, like I said, we had 75 libraries that were automated when we went live in 2007. Right now, we have 143 member libraries in 189 buildings, and only 4 of those are union listers. Every other library is fully automated with RSA. We have 98 public libraries. We have 42 school libraries. And the question about what does a school library get from a consortia like RSA, in our case, beyond just the typical check-in, check-out cataloging. And by the way, we have a 5-person cataloging department because small libraries don't have catalogers and we have to do that work for them. They also get eRead Illinois with their membership. That's something that we bought for all of our members because we knew the majority of our members weren't going to be able to do it on their own. They get access to a catalog of over 50 million open educational articles, OER stuff, online journals that have open articles in them, ebooks, some e-audio books. Basically, if there is something out there in the world that is an open journal or open article or anything that's taxpayer funded now has to be published on the open web, there's a product that Cersei Dynex has that packages that all together and it just appears in our catalog as if by magic. And I know a lot of schools really appreciate that. There's also in-depth reporting and access to the 4 million items in the RSA system to just show up in delivery. So our school libraries get a lot of value for the money that they're spending with us. We've got 3 academics and 2 specials. The makeup of RSA is very different than the other consortia in the state. We have 34 public libraries serving less than 2,000 patrons in their population served. 34 serving less than 2,000. We have 25 that serve between 2,000 and 4,000. We have 21 public libraries between 4 and 10,000. And only 16 of our public library members serve more than 10,000 members. If you map that out against the other libraries in the state, when you look at the consortia, the graph goes like this. The bump before us is the aggregate of all of the non-consortia libraries. So RSA as a consortia on average is smaller than the average non-consortia library in Rails. We are primarily small libraries. We've got, of all those schools, 25 of those schools have less than 500 students. 13 schools have between 500 and 1,000, and only 4 of our school systems have more than 1,000 students. Again, mostly small buildings serving small staffs. Many of those schools, their entire budget is their RSA bill, and they don't buy books. They just have whatever's given to them. So from RSA's standpoint, what does independence really mean? Well, of course, number one, it's primarily employing our own staff. And to the member libraries, they really care if a staff member works for Rails or works for RSA. They don't really know the differentiation between RSA and Rails. Very nebulous. The same, you'll hear the same thing from Swan and Prairie Cat and the other consortia. Again, it's the libraries deal with what they deal with, and you know, the specifics of it are a little bit different. But from the staff standpoint, oh, this is huge. My staff are a little bit worried. They're excited, sure, great, but also a little bit worried because we've had a nice stable relationship and now it's something's new is happening and we can't give them all the answers that they want. We still have to do things like figure out vehicles, figure out where we're going to live. We have to replace 100% of everything that we touch to do our job, not our automation system, which RSA owns, but everything we use to do our job will have to be replaced because right now, all of that belongs to Rails. And it has to belong to Rails until we are our own employees for freedom of information requests, if for nothing else, right? So because we're Rails employees, we use Rails stuff. All that has to be replaced. Office space, I think I mentioned. Right now we have space in this building. It's up to our board whether we continue that or not. We will need at least a small office space. And right now we use Rails Finance, and that is one of the legacy services that is provided basically to anybody who asks for it as far as the consortia go. And we will 1000% continue using the Rails Finance services because they are fantastic. Fantastic. You cannot get better service than we get from the Rails Finance department. So what are the difficulties in us doing this, right? You might think, well, what's the big deal? You write some job descriptions, you go and get some insurance, and you hire your staff. No big deal. Well, it is a big deal for us because RSA is currently organized as a 501c3 not-for-profit charity. It took 2 years and probably 50,000 pieces of paper to get that status back in the day. It was a lot of work. Every other consortia in Rails is organized as an Illinois intergovernmental instrumentality. They are in effect a unit of government for Illinois, and we're not. And we aren't because in 2010, when we had to make the decision to pull out of Alliance Library System to protect the assets because no one knew if the merger would happen, we didn't have a board of directors. The way RSA governed itself was basically a body of the whole. And for us to have converted to an Illinois intergovernmental instrumentality in 2010 or 2011 would have required 76 libraries physically present in one place. RSA didn't have 76 libraries physically present in one room when we selected our new automation system. And believe me, our libraries were very interested in what the decision for that was. So we chose to go with the 501c3 just so that we didn't have to meet Open Meetings Act. Over the years, we have converted over fully to a board structure now. And so it's less of a deal for us now. But again, it took us probably 8 years or so to get fully to having a board that had all of the power and, then the board was granting power to our membership groups rather than there being this weird bylaws section that said the board did some things and those membership groups did other. The board has looked at every possible option as far as converting for staffing. We looked at mergers with other consortias. We looked at partnerships for staffing alone with other consortia. We even talked to Share down in Heartland for a bit, just to see how that relationship would work out. We looked at partnering with our RSA member libraries to hire our staff. That could have been one or more of our RSA member libraries to hire individual staff. Cersei Dynex, our vendor, offered to hire our staff directly. They've never done that for anyone, but their CEO called me because they were concerned as well, and said, hey, we'll do this for you if you really need it. It's very nice of them to say that they'll do that, but boy, it's really hard to migrate over to, say, an innovative system if your employees are from Cersei Dynex. So we had to very kindly tell them no. And so we even looked at, well, maybe we should just disband. Not that we were going to, but it had to be on the table. So in the end, the decision was made that, the only viable path forward for us is to remain an independent entity on our own. Honestly, we're too big really to merge comfortably at this point with where technology's at. So we made the decision, okay, we're going to press forward. Now, how do we do this? Because we are a 501c3, we're not eligible for IMRF right now. And is in 2019, when Rails first said, hey, you guys are going to need to start working towards your independence, I talked to my staff, and every single one of my staff told me, if RSA is not an IMRF employer, I will find a job in an RSA library that is, and then you'll need to replace me. I have 11 staff members, and since 2019 until now, every one of them, every couple of months, just reminds me, you need to have IMRF or I'm going to go find another job. So IMRF is kind of job one for us. And to do that, we need to convert to an Illinois intergovernmental instrumentality. So that is where we are going. The one other big thing that we need to do is to rework our fee structure, because as you can guess, converting from an organization that gets a lot of benefit from being partially Rails employees is going to require more money. So we are working on a new fee structure that we're working on the 2029 total, and then phasing a fee structure in over 4 years with 1 year of basically flat fees for anybody who doesn't think they can get there. But that's going to be a fairly major bump to probably 70 at least libraries, if not 100 of our members are looking at large increases in membership costs. And when we talk about school libraries, I'm worried. School librarians don't have much power. School administrators don't understand the value of school libraries. We lost 2 school library members this year alone, one of which the person who ran that library had been on the board multiple times over the years. She got a phone call in the middle of May, hey, we're closing the library at the end of the year. That's just how it goes. And I am worried that our school library membership is going to take a pretty big hit from this. But there's really nothing we can do about that. After this is done, I will post a link to our support site. The independence page on our support site is the #1 place to go to look at our timeline and our documents and all of this stuff as it's coming along. I will tell you that the timeline for independence is a 3-year timeline. We can't just do this all at once. Year 1 is that governance change from a 501c3 to an Illinois intergovernmental instrumentality. So that means what? We have to write the Illinois Intergovernmental Agreement. We have to write brand new bylaws. We have to reconstitute our board. We have to rework our governance structures. We have to rework our membership groups because they used to be governance groups and now they're not. Most of that work is done. We're just down to right now, what questions do we need to get resolved from the lawyers? Because now we've got all of this done, we need to start working on the fee structure because that is due to members by the end of January. So for this year up through June of 2024, once we roll that fee structure out in February, it's going to be all hands on deck, going out and visiting members, visiting boards, visiting schools to explain the fee structure. We have a communications package we're working on for school librarians, for public librarians, to give to their administrators or whoever needs to make these decisions to explain the history of RSA, what RSA is, what we provide, the history of our fee structure, all of those things to the members so that they understand what they would be giving up if they decide to pull out. And also so that our members understand that once 51% of our member libraries sign the intergovernmental agreement, RSA will be converting its governance on the 1st of July of 2024. And anyone who doesn't sign that membership agreement, we have to turn them off because they will not be a member of the new organization. We need to make sure that our libraries understand, I need to sign this, even if I don't think I can afford the new fee structure. FY25, the fees will be relatively flat. We've already told our membership what the fees will be for FY25, and it's pretty flat, right? We gave them a whole year because we want anybody who feels like they can't afford the fee structure increase that'll start in FY26 to have time to find something to replace RSA. That's year one. Year two is the year we have to hire our staff. And that of course means getting IMRF to talk to us. And they won't even talk to us until we're an Illinois intergovernmental instrumentality. I've tried, they don't want to talk to us because we don't fit. So in July of next year, I'll get to talk to IMRF and maybe they'll listen. Took Parade Cat, I think 2 years of work to get in after they requested theirs, 2 or 3 years to get actually in, and Rails had to write a nice letter of support and all kinds of things. So it's a long process. We have to recreate our Rails benefits package, or as much of it as we can. And again, staff are Rails members and, you know, they are comfortable with what they have. And I think they'd be quite happy to keep as much of it as they can. We have to figure out what to do with HR, what we have to do with payroll, what we have to do with admin tasks. We don't do any of that now. It all goes through Rails. We've got to write new position descriptions. We've got to take into account all these new jobs that we don't currently do. We've got to figure out how much money we're going to have so we can work back from that amount to figure out how many staff members we can have. So there's a lot of work that'll have to happen in the first 6 months of fiscal year 25. Because my goal is by March to be able to give to my staff a package that says, here's what your job description would be, here's the benefits package, here's the salary ranges. Hopefully most of that is very close to what we have now. Do you want to continue working for RSA, or do we need to start looking for someone to fill your position? Or depending on how the outcome of this comes, we're going to have to tell people, I'm sorry, but we couldn't figure out how to make your position work in the new independent RSA. And I want to give people as much time as humanly possible before we have to hire directly on the 1st of July. I don't know that we will have to do that for anybody, and I'm hoping we don't, but it is always a possibility. So I want to give people at least 3, if not 4 months of headway to know and be able to make a decision and not feel super rushed. And we also have to replace our help desk because as a 501c3, we get a lot of stuff for free. We use Salesforce as our help desk. And the first renewal after we convert over goes from no dollars a year to $120,000 a year. And our help desk is not worth $120,000 a year out of our budget. So we're going to have to buy a new help desk and get that running at the same time that we're hiring staff. And then the third year of that plan, which is kind of the last year of the independence process, is replacing everything that Rails does from the infrastructure and IT and support side. And that's everything from laptops, email, our email system, our office software system, our phones, office software, supplies, networking stuff, online, storage, vehicles. We'll probably try and remain in the building, but who knows, office space. So we're gonna take a year to get all of that done. And hopefully the plan is that we will be completely independent from Rails, except for the things that we're either leasing or renting by the 30th of June of 2026, which by the way is the last day of the window that we were given in 2019. But we will meet that to the day, if not a little bit sooner. And then when all of that is done, rather than take a break and enjoy ourselves, then we're going to go right into a full-on library automation system examination and possibly do a migration, because in 2027 we will have been running Symphony for 20 years. And who knows, maybe there'll be some new system that we need. So the work does not slow down. That is all I have for you. Questions for me?
Oh, man.
Well, Kendall, this is Monica. I just want to again thank you and the RSA board, all the work that's going into this process. And we really appreciate the reporting on this as well. It's been a long time since we've talked about this here on the Rails board. So we just wanted to make sure you had a full update of everything that was going into this transition. But I really do want to thank you, Kendall, for that. And also note, as you did earlier, we have enjoyed our working relationship with your team and the work that you do and the work you do for your members. So thank you.
Yeah, and it turns out I'm not on the Zoom like I normally am, so I cannot just cut and paste a link in. But if you go to support.librariesofrsa.org, and right there on the main kind of masthead of our homepage is an item for Independence Project, and that's where you could see all of our stuff, or you can just send me an email and I'll send you the link.
I'll send it.
We'll send it. Yes. All right. Thank you, Kendall and Joe. Next up, we have Dan with a new member application for McKinley Park Charter School.
Yeah, I'm gonna come into the light for a young crowd. Okay, so you have an application from the Horizon Science Academy of McKinley Park. So they are a charter school in the city of Chicago, and I met the librarian there at IO. She came to our system services presentation, which was great. She heard about all the things that she could be part of. She wanted to log into L2, but she couldn't figure out how, and we had a longer conversation about membership. So I think that they would make a great addition, and I'm happy to answer any questions you all might have.
Done your research, so usually.
Right. If there are no questions for Dan, may I have a motion and a second to approve the McKinley Park Charter School for Rails membership and send to the Illinois State Library for final approval?
I move we accept the McKinley Park Charter School for Rails membership.
I'll second Dan's recommendation.
Renee, thank you.
For it, huh?
Yeah.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, no. Motion carries. Next up, we have the United Against Book Bans partner invitation. I'll turn that over to Monica.
Thank you, Alex. So in your packet, you saw the partner organization for Unite Against Book Bans. This went through our regular process through our advocacy committee. So it was presented to our advocacy committee in terms of the opportunity for partnership. As it noted in your packet, Unite Against Book Bans is a relatively recent initiative of the American Library Association's Intellectual Freedom Committee. It's just been around since April of 2022 and specifically is in support of the most recent round of materials challenges that have happened since that time. There is a list of partner organizations that is available on their website, both national organizations as well as state and local organizations that are already partnered. Monica, as the chair of the Advocacy Committee, is there anything you would add about this particular invitation and the movement that went to the full board?
No, I think we wholeheartedly bring it forward to you. I think my vote was hell yes. So yeah, so, but I do appreciate the new process of bringing things like this to advocacy first, and then yeah, it's a good process.
Any questions about this particular process or about Unite Against Book Bans in general, benefits, understanding of this group?
You know, by any chance, I can't recall if the state library sends anything to the public libraries in regards to it. Just so that if they don't, if we're able to send like marketing tools to libraries, just so that they can celebrate and just continues on.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the state library does, although we can find out. Unite Against Book Bans in particular does have a very robust toolkit with a lot of really valuable resources that can be used both at the individual library level as well as with community members. And that is one thing about this initiative, is that it's meant to appeal not just to libraries, but also to partners. So in the community, publishers, other organizations that support literacy and intellectual freedom in general. So it can be very useful for people even outside of libraries too.
Or probably added, you probably have done it too, at the Rails Minute, adding it into just.
Yeah, we have definitely, it's available through links on the Materials Challenge Pulse page. I know in previous years we've presented on some of those things, but it's probably been a while since we've brought it to the group.
Okay, any further discussion? If not, may I have a motion and a second to sign on as a partner organization for Unite Against Book Bans?
So moved with another hell yeah.
Second. You know, it can't be a second, it has to be a. Oh, well, it doesn't. You want to participate and then it's a hell yes. Hell sex. Trying to put words in your mouth.
Alice? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Hell yeah. Next up, we have Joe with our board development topic for this month, EDI updates.
Thank you, Alex. And I apologize for the redundancy, because I know if some of you were on the member update on Wednesday, you would have heard me speak about in specifically social justice for libraries through Freedom Lifted. So I know I've spoken to the board before about this, shared with the EDI board committee as well, that during the present fiscal year, we really wanted to pursue some sort of online training resource that would be available to all of our members, right? The last fiscal year, we had a cohort that was available to a select few almost. Now we wanted a resource that everybody could access. So on Wednesday through eNews announced a member update, we were for libraries course through Freedom Lifted. And as a reminder, if you're not familiar with Freedom Lifted, let me pull it up on the screen here. They're an organization focused on equity, social justice, education for organizations, and specifically for libraries. You may be familiar with Mia Henry, who does a lot of great work in this area, has done work for PLA, just spoke at Prairie Cats Users Group Day as a keynote just a couple months ago. So you'll find this now on the Rails website, on our education sort of menu, and there's a page for Freedom Lifted. You get a bit of a description, couple videos just introducing what it is, how to log in or how to sign up for it. But basically any Rails member library staff can set up an account. They just need their library affiliated email address, and they can set up an account. They do have to log in to the Rails website with their L2 credentials, because this is a resource that we have purchased for our members. I do want to point out that while it mentions justice at work in public libraries, this is a resource that really is applicable for all library types. It is largely foundational. There may be moments in which they refer to public libraries, but from my experience, 98% of it really is going to be applicable regardless of what your sort of community is that you're serving. Once you get into, so there's just really a couple clicks, you get a couple confirmation emails, and then this is essentially what the Justice at Work learning modules look like. You can see on the left-hand side, it's organized into several different chapters. Within each chapter, you can find a variety. It's going to be videos that Mia Henry is doing, presenting. It's going to be, you can see a workbook in here, different articles, other multimedia. So it really is something more just than passive, 90-minute webinar, that it really is trying to engage the learner in a lot of different ways. It's about 5 to 6 hours worth of content. And then at the conclusion, after you've completed, they give you a lot of different ideas on other resources to look into for those that want to explore further. And in addition to that, and with the idea that while every individual does this training, can do it individually, there's a lot of opportunity for discussion within the library, with your colleagues. So they've included, and we've included this on the website as well. There is a sort of discussion guide, and that you can see each chapter has some discussion questions. So if you do have a number of staff who are going through this content, you can have some sort of facilitated conversations, and they give you some guidance there in terms of how to frame those conversations. There's also a planning guide. So if you really want to be intentional about, again, the training content and how you want to approach it within the library, where and how can you maybe use this content to think about things like your policies and where you might be able to think about making changes in your organization based on the content. But again, with it being online and on demand, staff can go in, take 5 minutes of a video, and then they have to step away, remembers their place in line, they can come back to it. And this subscription is going to be available through the fall next year. So this training resource will be available for some time. So again, I think that the hope is that by having something available, we know it's so hard to schedule anything, and we have so many part-time staff transitioning on to the organization, to have a training resource available at all times. We hope it's going to be really helpful. And I was wanting to come in today and say within 48 hours we had 500 people sign up, but they don't update their data until Monday. So that flashy number, but I'm sure there is one. We ask all of you, within your own organizations, we hope it's a training resource that your staff can take advantage of, and certainly share it within your networks, because it is open to all of our members. Any questions on the Freedom Lifted stuff?
So
Yeah.
does this offer CPDUs or CEUs?
It does. That's a good question. It does not. Specifically for school librarians, we're talking about PDH credit. No, and we'll have to, that's an interesting question, because one of the things that Rails will be doing in the months ahead is, right now we kind of subcontract with the state library to be able to offer professional development hours for certain trainings of ours. One of the things we want to do as an organization, now that Heartland has become an approved provider, is for Rails to become an approved provider. Whether there's any way that we could, now typically ISB would say any sort of training that qualifies has to be done like live, as opposed to recording. That at least is always the guidance we've received. So that might not be applicable here, but it's always worth asking the question if that's time that, certainly for school librarians, that they're doing this. And obviously the topic is very much relevant for them. So I think it's at least worth asking the question, Catherine. Thank you. Okay, and then I will just, obviously this is not the only thing that we want to do. So I will just also share, a few other things. So obviously Freedom Lifted, but, wanting to supplement and continue doing the same kind of training around EDI that we've been doing. So since January 2022, which was the time that our strategic plan was approved by this board, and EDI, that sort of strategic priority we've been able to do around almost 20 events focused on EDI. I've had over 1,500 register, and it's a combination of both, the events that we've offered, and then several that have come through our networking groups and other libraries that have applied for CE event grants that we've been able to offer to our members. And of course, a lot of this is recorded content that we know is also being accessed by a lot of other, a lot more members. The equity audit, working with our EDI consultant to review the employee handbook through an equity lens. I think that was mentioned in your monthly report. Biz Lindsay Ryan, our consultant, has already done one read of that, has given us a lot of feedback, things to consider. Myself, Monica, and Sam Daly, our HR manager, have already had a couple meetings about that. And I think eventually we'll bring some of that to policy committee to look over and see what suggestions we might want to consider. We still do have our Rails climate team, which we've actually just cycled 4 or 5 new members on. And what's great about this transition, we have a number of staff who are new to our organization or newer that are not part of the climate team. And I think it's really important to have perspective of people that have joined the organization fairly recently to give us their perspective on how we're doing in this area of internal culture. EDI board committee, obviously Vanessa and Rosie and Diane are all members of that. We just had a first meeting for several new members of that committee who I think are all just fantastic members from our member library staff who bring a lot of experience with this topic and a lot of passion at really wanting to do something substantive. And so I think there's a lot of enthusiasm about what this committee might, sort of guidance that we're going to get to be able to do more. And then of course ongoing, and I highlight a couple things that we'll be doing next month. We have sort of the third in our trio of webinars from Right to Be, which is an organization that does a lot of equity training that have been some of the most attended webinars that we've had since I've been. And then also we want to do EDI training that is really intended for library trustees. I mean, a lot of the training we do it works for trustees. It could be applicable, but I think something tailored to the role of board members to hopefully convey why libraries are doing this work, why they're coming to the board requesting, whether it's through budget or other sort of programming. Why is this topic so important to us? And to really do some training that's focused. That's what we're going to have on a Saturday morning as opposed to a Tuesday morning or Thursday afternoon. It's always hard to get trustees. They're volunteers, they work full time. So we're going to try to find ways to offer this training both Saturday and also recorded content. So that's just a handful of things that we look to do in the year ahead, and hopefully more as we work more with the EDI board committee and get more ideas from that group and just our memberships as a whole. So I will stop there and ask if there are any questions or comments.
Just a thank you for offering the Freedom Lifted training, and we are looking at incorporating it into our onboarding process for staff.
Nice.
That's great. Yeah. And that, again, the ability to everybody can participate and not just those who have the time and part-time staff. It as an organization, it can't just be a few people, right? It can't just be a team. It really has to be something everyone engages in for it to be impactful. So hopefully this will be helpful and an impetus for some changes. Yes. go ahead.
Well, this is not what you said, but it's related to that. Yesterday, I was at the Carly annual meeting and I was at the table where we were talking about EDI issues, and we were talking about the EDI aspects of Find More Illinois and how maybe this is for a library like mine, an academic library that has a lot of stuff. This Find More Illinois is a way to make the access to that more equitable for residents of the state in general. So we're trying to sell people on that idea.
Yeah, and that equity has a broad meaning, and that's a great point. Yeah.
Make it less expensive for academic libraries. Enjoy it.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you.
Thanks, Joe. All right, that brings us to Rails board member reports. Does any Anybody have any news they would like to share from their library this month? Not everyone all at once.
LaGrange Public Library opened its drive-up window this week. Yay! It was a 12-week project that took 51 weeks, so this is a big deal.
You excel.
Yes, you know, and yeah, it's really exciting, and it's been just staff has been awesome trying to figure it out and make it work. And then we probably saw a lot of your staff members today at the Laconia unconference that happened, and it was an awesome event to learn about communities of practice and to network and connect with people. And it's people already asking when are you going to have it again? So keep your eyes open. We may be looking for more facilitators and mentors. And thank you to Jeanette for coming and speaking about data-driven decision-making with us today. It was really helpful.
I'm gonna put on my ILA hat real fast and just reiterate, sign up for the legislative meetups. Those are coming up fast. And it makes, you can look at the various lists of the legislators who have been invited. If you are concerned about whether or not your local legislator has RSVP'd or not, make sure you reach out to them personally and that you would really like to see them there, because we could all use your help in getting those legislators to show up at those. And I will personally be at both the south and west suburban ones, so come and see me.
Really, where's the list of legislators who have signed up? Is it on the?
Oh, it's
ILA?
on the ILA webpage on the legislative meetups registration. At the bottom of each one's information is the list of legislators that have been invited to that specific meetup. And it gives, there's a column for whether or not they have RSVP'd, and if so, who is coming, whether it's the legislator themselves or staff.
No, I don't think, is there anyone else here that lives in the Northwest region? Probably not, because they started a new one in Northwest, and I'm one of the organizers of it, trying to get people to come to that.
We'll have a real staff member there. Dan's going.
All right. Anything else? Hearing none. There is no meeting in December. Our next board meeting will be Friday, January 19th at 1 p.m. Hope you all enjoy the holidays, and we'll see you next year at 3:06.